Welcome to the Thriving Farmer Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Kilpatrick. Our mission is to inspire, educate, and celebrate sustainable farming. We believe that you can build a profitable, sustainable farm that gives you true farm freedom. Join us as we talk to farmers, innovators, educators, and entrepreneurs to glean their top takeaways in business and life.
Discover the rich, nutrient-dense flavor of Mall Ranch almonds, grown using regenerative farming practices in California's fertile almond country. Jimmy and Jennifer Simonian started their farm with zero experience, and through dedication and commitment to organic farming, they've created almonds that stand out for their taste and quality. By focusing on soil health and sustainable practices, they've transformed their farm into a thriving family-run operation. Now, you can get these premium almonds directly from the farm, ensuring your purchase goes straight to the hardworking farmers who grow your food. Visit shop.farmoncentral.com to buy fresh, organic bulk almonds today and support small-scale farming done right. Hey, Thriving Farmers, Michael Kilpatrick here with yet another episode of the Thriving Farmer Podcast. And today my guest is Trisha Bates, founder of Urban American Farmer in Austin, Texas. With a background in urban planning and a passion for bridging the gap between farms, chefs, and communities, Trisha helps people grow their own food, source locally, and engage more deeply with the food system through events like Field Guide Festival and Farm School for Chefs. Trisha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Michael. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Give us a little bit of background of how did you get into farming?
So I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois. My parents were not farmers, but my grandparents were sort of traditional corn and soybean farmers. But I grew up surrounded by farmland, and we always kind of had, various animals, and we had sheep for a lot of my childhood growing up. And then we always had like big gardens and spent a lot of time, with our family and our community, growing food, processing food, making and sharing and eating food together. So I definitely have a passion and a background for farming and for farmers themselves. Just being surrounded by farmers and my spending time with my grandfather and uncle in the fields. Like I would, when I was younger in the summer, I would go with my grandmother to take lunch to them in the field, and it was always like a huge part of my life growing up. And then I moved away, went to college, studied complete opposite direction. I studied urban planning, and I was ready to kind of get out and have an adventure, and then I graduated and I opened a bakery with my sister.
Okay.
And through that process, it sort of brought me right back to farming, because we were looking for the best ingredients we could find. We wanted the best eggs. We wanted local milk and cream. We wanted fruit when it was in season. We wanted to go out and get the best strawberries. And so we started to do a lot of local farmer sourcing and educating ourselves on who was selling what and in that area. And I kind of just stayed in hospitality for the rest of my career. And I worked in all different sides of restaurants, and I worked in the front of house and back of house, and I worked as an accountant and bookkeeper. And so I kind of worked my way through restaurants to the point where I wanted to get back to the farming side. It was sort of like the last frontier of the hospitality business was sourcing that I hadn't really participated in. And so I started to spend some time with farmers in the Austin area. I would go to the farmers market on the weekend and ask the farmers if I could come out and spend some volunteer time with them. And I did that I took Fridays off and did that for almost a year. And with a lot of different types of farmers, I learned about growing pecans in Texas. I'm in Austin, and I learned about produce farming, small scale, and backyard farming and urban farming. And I spent some time did a goat apprenticeship, and learned how to muck out a goat barn and herd goats. I just really wanted to be immersed in it. And a big part of that for me is living in Austin, in the city, and having spent so much of my life in the country and surrounded by nature and animals and farming, I got really where I felt like I needed to connect back to that. And so that kind of swept me back out to being able to drive out into the country and drive out to see farms that were farther away and just get, windows down and find some freedom in that. And after I did that for about a year, I decided I could start growing my own food. So I tilled up
Okay.
my entire yard, about a quarter of an acre. And I knew that when I started growing food, I wanted to sell to restaurants because I have always loved chefs and what they create and fine dining and all of that. And I really saw food as a way to inspire the chefs. Like if I could grow something that they had never seen before, or something they hadn't tasted, or something that they couldn't currently get in the marketplace, that would be exciting for them. And I really look at them as sort of the artists of the food world, and they're great advocates, right? So if they all decide to
Yes.
start using a new product, it's like what's a good example? Like shishito peppers. When all the chefs started using shishito peppers and created a market for it, and then everyone started growing shishitos, and now that's a standard crop. So I saw that there was an opportunity to have some influence there, and kind of create market demand ahead of what was currently in the market.
Hmm.
And so besides just growing in this very small urban scale, because I couldn't really, I would bring them a new product and then they'd be so excited. And then I would say, well, that's all I've got right now. Yep.
That's it.
And so I realized like I was probably much better at some of those pieces, identifying the trends and building the relationships with the chefs and the restaurants, than I was farming. I mean, I just didn't have a lot of land and I didn't have a lot of time. I have two small kids, and so I wasn't going to move out into the country and get more land at that point. So I sort of, I don't know, decided that this space in between chefs and farmers, or buyers and producers, was a really good place for me to be. I could speak to both sides. I could understand the challenges and how to approach a restaurant. I could also understand the farmer's perspective and how that needed to go. Um, and so that's kind of what I did. That is the space that I have been building in for the last like 8 years.
Okay. All right. So talk us over a little bit about kind of like currently kind of what's your kind of scope?
So a lot of times I am responding to requests that come in. So part of the time I have a few different plots that I maintain, and grow food and sell to restaurants in the city. I also do a lot of relationship building and matchmaking. So if I go into a restaurant and I see that there's, they've got Village Farm tomatoes on the menu, and that there are local farms that have way better cherry tomatoes, I will reach out, make a suggestion to either, if I have the relationship with the restaurant, or if I have the relationship with the farmer, to say, hey, you should go sell your tomatoes at this restaurant. Things like that. And then, I will work for individual farmers who want to get their product into the market, that want to meet buyers. I will also work for buyers who want to meet farmers and want to be, make those introductions. So I kind of go between both sides. And then more recently, I've been applying that knowledge and experience to some of our local school districts. And there's currently government funding called Local Food for Schools, that has gotten applied differently in every state. But in Texas, that money went directly to schools, and the schools didn't necessarily have the relationships with local farmers, know how to do that sourcing, know how to speak to farmers, even really know anything about seasonality. And so I've been trying to kind of help matchmake and build some systems and relationships in that space as well.
Gotcha. So the matchmaking is that something where you just pass them on to the farmer, or do you kind of provide like an actually matching service?
It is a lot. It is very individualized, depending
Okay.
on what people need. And I think that's one of the things I love most about doing this work is like instead of building a whole business that has a really specific set of systems, I'm
Hmm.
sort of problem solving for each person that comes across my desk. So it can look both ways. I can, you know, look at their menu and say, here's 10 items that you could source from local farmers right now, and here's a list of farmers. Go ahead and reach out to them, or I'll make an introduction, and you can, take that. Um, there's a lot of different ways it can work.
Gotcha. Okay. And then talk to us about some of the crops that you're growing in your plots.
Yeah. So, um, because I mainly sell to restaurants and because I am farming in urban spaces, I'm always looking to sort of optimize products that the restaurants can't get either the same quality or the same varieties from larger suppliers. So it's a little bit more specialty, but I would say like it's also things that don't stay in the ground for too long. I mean, it's a challenging. We can farm all year in Austin, but it can be really challenging because our seasons change. We can have a 40-degree fluctuation in one day. So,
Okay.
um,
Yes.
I really try to kind of keep to a set of crops that um, make sense both on the farming side, not too much labor, not too much of an investment of time or land, and what is really valuable to a chef. And some of that stuff, it could be like herbs, edible flowers, but also like smaller root veg, things that are really pretty and can be harvested pretty quickly before there's like a whole lot of pest damage. And then a lot of like, greens. I've been doing lettuces and some different varieties of lettuce that you could get. I mean, right now, what's mostly available, sort of like on a larger scale, are
Hmm.
aquaponic or hydroponic lettuces. And so I've been trying to figure out some really good systems for growing out different varieties of lettuce that you couldn't necessarily get in one of those systems.
Okay. Okay. Um, and then talk to me about some of the different festivals and different events that you do as well.
Yeah, so it started kind of small scale. Like, how do I get buyers and producers to spend some time with each other? Because one of the things I realized kind of early on talking to chefs is that they are often looking back at like what what was grown last year, and that's kind of how they plan their menu. And then talking to farmers, it's very similar. Like they're making decisions about crop planning based on what sold last year. And so,
Hmm.
I think there's a huge opportunity for having those conversations together ahead of time and being able to, like I said, create that demand or that desire for something that isn't necessarily in the market, and have some sort of conversation and commitment to that crop so that a farmer doesn't have to take as much risk. And so, based off of that idea of just having more conversation, more interaction between the producer and the buyer, I started to create some of these almost silly, fun farm based events. The first one was a 1 mile run with the goats out at this local brewery who had trained their goats to run a mile. So
Okay.
I took some chefs and some people out, and we ran a mile with the goats, and we talked about ruminant animals and the land and what they're doing to restore it. And that was really fun and funny and successful. And people kind of were like, "Oh, interesting! Like, something I maybe hadn't thought about before." And
Yeah.
so After that, I did a few more things, but one of the things that I did was we called the Badger Flame Beet Invasion. And we took Badger Flame Beets and grew out a whole bunch and then put them on the menu at a bunch of different restaurants. And the idea was really to see, like, on a larger scale, could I create demand for a product that was not currently in the market? And what happened was it was actually really successful. Once we got done with our crop of Badger Flame Beets, then the chefs, because they had used them for a month, were all asking for more of these beets. And so then some of our local farmers started growing that crop they hadn't before, so that they could kind of fill that demand.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, sort of hit the pandemic, and it was a big question mark with restaurants for a while. And then about 5 years ago, I met my business partner in Field Guide Festival, and she comes from like large scale event production. And we sort of brought our pieces together, and she was able to take some of the concepts of bringing farmers into the city to talk to buyers, to talk to guests, to talk to diners. And so we built this whole festival around presenting food that was grown by a local farmer, sold to a local restaurant. They transformed it, made their dish, and then they present that food together at the festival. So, sort of the idea of, a lot of times you see a farm name on a menu at a restaurant, but you don't know anything about that farm. You don't know anything about their farming practices. You don't have a face to put with that name. And you don't know necessarily the farmer's name. You might know the farm name. And you don't know where to get that product after the restaurant, right? If you had this really great chicken, but you don't know what to do after that. So the idea is that it kind of makes that whole piece visible. So you can go see this, eat this great food, see the farmer, put a face to a name, talk to them and ask them questions, ask them where to get their products, and really like start to build some of those like personal relationships with the local farmers.
Mm-hmm. And kind of what has that developed into?
I mean, we're going into our fourth year in April, and we started with 12 chefs and 12 farmers the first year. And I thought it was challenging to get farmers to all show up at this event at the same time on a weekend when they've got farmers markets, they've got families. Um, but this year, in our fourth year, we've got 30 farmers and 30 chefs. And I still have people asking, like new farmers that maybe I haven't met yet, asking to be a part of it, which I think is really, it's telling that like it's a successful endeavor and that they're finding value in it. Because I mean, if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I could get 30 farmers in the same place at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, I would have said absolutely not. Um, and so that feels really good. And I mean, one of the things that we're seeing is because we pair up the chef and the farmer for this event, you know, not every single not every single pairing becomes a future customer or producer
Correct.
supplier relationship, but a handful every year develops. And we start to see those products showing up on menus or maybe at different organizations or sponsors that show up. Like we're starting to see the the networks and the web kind of growing and strengthening as it goes.
Correct. Gotcha. And is that you guys self fund that yourself, or is that sponsored by any organization?
It is self-funded, so we really just bootstrapped it. Still are. We're a very small team.
Yeah.
We do have sponsors, but even selling sponsorships is it's a big job. It takes a lot of time. So it's a big lift for a very small team, but we're figuring it out and making it work.
Okay. Awesome. And you also do some foodscaping. Talk about that.
Yeah. So really, that came out of the pandemic. I was growing food, as I mentioned, at my house and just on social media, sharing some of my journey. And people really started to reach out during that time. They had extra time on their hands. They were interested in getting involved and growing their own food. And so I sort of, that became an evolution from, here's a list of things you can order on Amazon that will show up at your house and you can just start your garden from that, to I created a zine, something that you could flip through, and it had some descriptions of like how to build a raised bed, how to, a planting calendar, some things like that. And then I started to get some questions about, could I come help people do that? And so sort of the first person that really wanted me to do that was someone that is still a customer now. But she basically asked me to install garden beds at her house, and then maintain them. And so I started to do that because I didn't know what else to do during that time. And then that business kind of grew on its own. And I do think that sort of that foodscaping, where people already maybe have a budget put aside to pay landscapers. It's kind of it's an easy small shift in mindset to allocate that maybe for a garden. And
Yes.
that's definitely, that's a high end experience. It's not everyone can afford to have a gardener. But what I notice is that people are using that not only as a source of food, but as an education piece for kids when they have, when they're homeschooling, or they have young kids at home and they want to get them outside and active and they want them to experience that. If they don't know how to grow food, if they don't know how to have a garden, um, then that's something they want to pay for, to bring someone in to do that for them.
Absolutely. So then how do you find your clients with that part of the business?
Um, I I don't need that many clients. So part of what makes my life and work successful is having a balance. So I want to be outdoors with my hands in the dirt a third of the time. I want to be on
Okay.
my computer a third of the time. And I want to be talking to people and building relationships a third of the time. And if I can kind of keep that balance, I'm in good shape. If something gets a little bit out of whack, then I start to feel like, I need to change some things. So I don't ever keep that many clients at once. And so they kind of just come, they just kind of word of mouth, actually. I've never really done
Gotcha.
done a whole lot of marketing or anything.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you've got a couple different areas or things you're working on. So by time combining all of them together, it makes a very full life.
It does, yes, yeah. I have a lot going on, but yeah, it's exciting and it feels balanced in some crazy way.
Yes. And do you have kids?
I do. I have two boys, ages 9 and 13, and they've really been on this journey with me. They've grown up understanding what food is and where it comes from, and what tastes good. So their palates are highly developed, which sometimes can be kind of annoying, because they know what a really good tomato tastes like, or a real head of lettuce. So, but I think for
Yeah.
the most part, that's really great.
Yeah. They won't settle.
No, they won't. No, they won't.
So, and again, as with that, talk a little bit about kind of like how their view of, I guess, the food system has developed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit hard to know what things your kids are picking up on when they're little.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I hear them say something about my work to someone else, and I see that they get it. I think for me, like, so much of my childhood was just absorbing that lifestyle. And I would have never said, like, "Oh, I'm going to be in farming," or "I know anything about food systems,"
Yes.
or I would have never been able to articulate that as a kid. But as an adult, reflecting back, there is so much that I just was a sponge about. And so I'm curious how that will impact them. I mean, I have an older sister, and she does not have the same affinity for farming that I do, right? So there's something about, that childhood experience, but also then just who
Yes.
who I am and who I became, with that interest. So I don't know. We'll see with my kids. Like they definitely have an awareness and an understanding. Um, and even things that I don't grow, like fruit, they love fruit. But if they ask for fruit that's out of season, we have conversations about why they won't like it. And then
Yes.
if they demand it and I buy it anyway and they taste it, they're like, this isn't any good. I'm like, yes, exactly. Thank you. Object lesson.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, it's something like here at the farm, we now bring in actual tree ripened citrus in December and
Mm.
January. And I can't eat citrus from the store anymore. You know, it's that different. It's that good that I'm like, no, I don't want it. You know, someone offers me an orange. I'm like, no, I'm just going to wait till December
Yeah,
because that's when it's actually good.
exactly. And that is, that convenience of having food whenever we want it. That's what we're fighting against. And not knowing that it's
Yeah.
better. So many people don't know that food can be better than it is in the grocery store.
Yes, yes, yeah, and the same thing like summer peaches. We have now worked with a specific farm because we know that the quality is really really good. So, yeah, it's people who shop at the grocery store, and I think that's part of the reason why we've been successful with that side of our business is because we really do seek out that best quality and make sure it is coming in at tree ripened.
Yeah, and it's, I don't even know. It's not even just that it's the best quality that but it's all of it. It is the fact that you're working with Mother Nature, right? You're working with nature
Hmm.
to produce the food in the right timeline instead of utilizing all these resources to try to offset those, to grow things when they might not want to be growing. Um, there's I don't know, there's an energetic component to that for me too, of like, let's make it easy. And then the food tastes good. It tastes better.
Hmm. Yeah. Talk a little bit. If you were to go back and start your journey over again, is there anything that you would drastically change, or are you happy with how it slowly kind of developed?
Ooh, I don't really do a whole lot of looking back, I guess. Um, I think that one thing that has been really helpful for me that I'm really glad I did, and I just did it by chance. I guess I did it by following my intuition, is that I built so many relationships with farmers when I had the time to do it. Now that I've built a business and I have older kids and just a whole bunch of different things in my life, I have way less time to drive out and talk to farmers for half a day.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so I'm really happy and glad that I invested that time in building those relationships and that sort of like self education, when I had the ability to do it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Working on farms, working with farmers, you'll learn so
So
much.
much and so helpful to work with a bunch of different farmers because everybody has their own way and all the land is
Hmm.
different and the systems are different. So it's really important to see it from a bunch of different perspectives before you jump in.
Hmm. Yeah. Before we go, talk a little bit about the growing season. You mentioned earlier how you can grow year round, but it's a challenge. So give us a little bit of an overview of what it's like farming in
Yeah, I've
Austin.
seen some memes about the seasons in Central Texas, and that there's like 12 different seasons. You've got like summer and then like 100-degree summer, and then you've got false fall and early spring, and then
Yes.
spring summer. It goes on and on. But I would say we've got two main growing seasons, which is a longer spring and a shorter fall. You can grow over the
Hmm.
winter. You can grow about three things in the summer. You can grow eggplant, okra, and like peppers. But
Yeah. And two of those aren't worth eating. No, that
well,
was not what I should have. No, I love peppers. I enjoy eggplant, not eggplant. I enjoy eggplant mainly cooked. Well, I mean, most of it's cooked, but there is a specific. It's escaping me now. A specific sauce that's made with
like
eggplant.
baba ganoush or something.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that is. I would say the only way I really enjoy eggplant, and okra's okay, but yeah, just the sliminess is
Yeah.
it's I think if you grow up with it, and I obviously grew up very northern. I grew up, I was born in St. Louis, but I spent most of my time in either upstate New York or in Massachusetts. So southern dishes are completely foreign
Yeah,
to
I
me.
think you have to grow up with the slime to really understand and appreciate it. I do not as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so summer is tricky. I think one thing I'm noticing is that some of our more seasoned farmers, and we don't have a lot. We don't really have an
Yeah.
older generation of small scale farmers to do some mentoring. So what I'm seeing now, and specifically one farmer comes to mind that has decided to not farm during the summer months. And I think that's a really important piece that some of our younger farmers in the area need to see. They need to see that even though you can farm all year round, maybe it's a better choice not to. Because
Yeah.
coming from the Midwest, like you have one season and then you have the rest of the years
Correct.
off and you go do something else and you kind of reset. And I don't know. I think that's something that we need to continue working towards here is better defining our seasons for what works for
Yeah.
humans.
Well, I think you've hit something right there. I think obviously farmers tend to just
Yeah.
work. And, up in New York, we had one growing season, even though we did, we grew in greenhouses. So we did grow during the fall and winters, but it was a very different type of growing. It was okay, the greenhouse thawed at 11 o'clock, I can go out and work for 3 hours. So it intentionally, slowed you down, made you actually spend that time planning. Here in Ohio, I have a really hard time getting my planning in just because it's so much warmer, and we're in the field until end of December typically doing projects and stuff. So yeah, you're right, that whole aspect of setting yourself up for success with giving the proper space around what you're doing, I think is so key.
Yeah, and we have just I don't know, it's the variation of weather is just so crazy. Like every
Yeah.
single season is different than the previous 5 years. Like it's really
Yeah.
unpredictable.
Now, Austin does have good groundwater, correct?
Yeah, I think we're doing pretty well in the city. We're using city water. In the country. You've got wells. You see the occasional well in the city, but um, there's definitely a conversation around dry farming here. There's one farmer in particular that's really been working towards that and trying to build some better systems for it. But again, you can't grow food for a lot of the year if you're not irrigating in Texas.
Yeah. And then talk about that. You talked about mentorship there and how kind of there was a vacuum there because the local food scene in Austin, like 30 years ago, there really wasn't one, right? Or
Correct. Yeah,
okay.
correct.
And it seems like because I've been obviously following the Austin food scene. It started with JBG Organics, which I believe they closed in 2001.
Yes, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were 4 urban farms that kind of made up a chunk of the agriculture scene in Austin. Um, 2 of them are still operating. One sold to a developer, and the other one is waiting to be sold to a developer. Um, and those were probably, as far as like kind of leaders in the community, those were some of the earlier farmers, but that was really only like 20 years ago that they started. And we have some that are a little bit further out. I would say Greengate are a little bit older farmers. Tecolote are retired now. I mean, the interesting thing about Austin, one of our farmers, Tim Milberg, tells stories about how he used to grow onions and sell them to Whole Foods, and he would drive them there on his bicycle. It was close enough, right? And so, like,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
kind of where we came from. And the
Yes.
development and the rate of development in Austin has just been astronomical.
Well, and then you have to look at the Whole Foods. I mean, Whole Foods now won't even typically work with local farmers. You have to only sell to distributors, and the amount of insurance that you have to sell to them. We look back into it probably 2014, 2012 to 2014 is when we were actively trying to figure that out. And it wouldn't make any sense. Even though at that point we were a large wholesale farm producing enough product to easily sell to them pallets at a time, it just wasn't worth it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's changed so much. And that was probably 30 years ago. Right. So it's like, and now we barely can get a farm to stay in the city limits because of the development and the cost of land.
Yeah. The pressure.
Yeah.
Development pressure. Well, Trisha, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story. And keep up the good work down there.
Thank you. It was great to chat with you and enjoyed our time.
Absolutely.
So there you have it, another episode in the books. So I'd love if you would hop on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Those mean everything to us. We love to hear what you're thinking. If you have a podcast guest that you can recommend, please pop on over to the Thriving Farmer Podcast website and leave us a review. That's thrivingfarmerpodcast.com.